Hello, it's me. I don't know why I said it like that. I'm running out of interesting ways to say hello.
Why am I mute? There we go. Now I should be good. Uh, no sound. Thanks everyone. Thanks
Oh
everyone.
my God. You
I
did. People will never know the incredible, amazing intro that you did. It was really
it
impressive. There was
was
there was there was rap. There was I mean,
it was a really
there was
dramatic entrance. Yeah.
there was beat poetry.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
It was
Yeah. If only I
incredible.
hadn't had my mic muted at the start.
But we could, I mean, it's too late to redo it, so I
It's too
guess I'll be
late.
the only one who knows.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Okay, you can hear now. Good, good, good. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Hi, Tune. Hi, Magical. Hi, May. Great, great. Everyone can hear me. That's excellent. Thanks so much for joining, everyone. I'm so excited to talk about She-Ra today. So before we get really too deep into it, I just want to talk a little bit about how the stream is going to go, how the discussion is going to go, because obviously this is going to be a little bit different from how we've done discussion streams in the past. In the past we've gone essentially scene by scene, getting really deep into each episode. Yeah, exactly, May. It's really unfortunate. So we're not going to necessarily be going scene by scene really deep into each episode, but we're going to be kind of talking about season one as a whole. So we're going to probably be jumping around a little bit in season one. So I know that there are a couple folks in the chat who haven't necessarily finished watching all of season one. So just a heads up that we are going to be jumping around a little bit, but I also
The show's been
have,
out for so long at this point, like we
yeah,
can afford to.
yeah. So just a heads up to anyone who may not have watched the entire season. We are going to be jumping around a little bit, but that being said, I have some more notes specifically just on the first five episodes that I want to talk about. So in terms of how much we're going to be talking about season one, there's definitely a lot of points in the first five episodes that I want to talk about. But we are going to be jumping around a little bit, and we'll be continuing this discussion of season one probably beyond this stream as well, because we have so much that we want to say that it's probably going to cover multiple streams. So just a heads up that it's not necessarily going to be as linear as our previous streams in the past. But we also won't necessarily outright go too deep into stuff that is beyond season one, right? We might talk about
Yeah,
a little bit of foreshadowing here and there of what season one is setting up to do in the later seasons. But we won't talk about specific scenes going on in the later seasons and things like that. So that's kind of how we're going to frame this discussion. And then, of course, if you guys have any comments or anything in the chat, feel free to chime in. We'll read them when they're appropriate. Am I missing anything, Tom? Do you have anything that you want to add?
no, I don't. I feel like we can probably crack in. I feel like it will be interesting to kind of touch upon where this show comes from creatively,
Yeah, yeah, I would love to
because
talk about that at the start. Yeah.
it's, it has since developed quite a reputation for itself as being this kind of like cornerstone of modern post Avatar adventure epics,
Yes, I
animated
know.
adventure epics.
I know a lot of people gave
Um,
me a hard time for not having seen it yet, and I can see even Zoe in the chats you finally watched Shira. Yes, I finally got to
and
it.
I'm gonna be using the term like post Avatar a lot because I think this show has first of all this show has like a lot in common with Avatar. I personally like it more, and I know that's a hot take.
Yeah,
I'm not going to justify that until we finish talking about all of the seasons, and then I'll justify it. But for now, just
yeah,
leave it at that. But also, I do feel like Avatar is like a cornerstone of like a turning point in modern animation.
yeah. At least in the West, right?
Um,
Yeah.
which kind of leaves this show in an interesting place because She-Ra, the original show, She-Ra, Princess of Power, is anything but modern animation. It's like
Oh
this
yeah.
relic from an old age being given the post Avatar treatment. Now we live in and well, this show certainly came out in the absolute peak of like 80s nostalgia, like Netflix shilling Stranger Things at us everywhere we go.
Right, right.
And I think we're only just like I feel like we're only just leaving the 80s nostalgia and entering 90s nostalgia.
Sure. Yeah.
Um like I feel like Stranger Things has run its course, but this came out like the peak of that 80s nostalgia.
Right. Totally.
Um because a lot of the kids who, the kids of the 80s are now making these shows and that's where
Yeah. Exactly.
they came from. but like this is the perfect thing, you know. Every now and again, you will get like a remake or a reboot or a sequel to an old thing that is genuinely really good. And this
Right.
She-Ra is one of the perfect shows to kind of do a reboot of, because let's be honest, She-Ra Princess of Power, the 1980s cartoon, was fucking terrible. It was really bad. Like you can't. It's unwatchable. It's funny.
Yeah.
Like it's like
Well, I mean, the intention of that show literally was just to sell toys,
it
right?
was
I
to
mean,
sell
it
toys.
wasn't
That's
even a real
you know.
show.
And so, you know, it's a show that obviously a lot of people were nostalgic for, but it
Hmm.
was not a good show.
Right.
And so She-Ra, it was perfect prime pick. You know, you could look at it two ways. On one hand, you can look at it as like this is prime pickings for a remake.
Yeah,
On the
totally.
other hand, you could look at it like, who cares? Like, why are they doing? No one
Yeah.
cares about She-Ra anymore. People only care about She-Ra when they make it gay, and the gatekeepers can come out of the woodwork and complain about it, as if they cared, as if
Right.
they actually cared. Um, and you weren't. I mean, you'll be aware of it because you're part of the animation community, but you weren't like keeping up with the show at the time.
Right.
The discourse around the show when it first came out was very much like a big sigh, like, you know, whoa, they're doing this. I can't believe they're doing this.
Mm-hmm.
They're making it woke, and you know, you get angry
Mm-hmm.
people talking about it. Um, Obviously, none of that really held up in the long run because the show is excellent. And a lot of the criticism about the designs being worse, it's like you literally have to know
Yeah.
nothing. You literally have to know nothing about the way character design works to think the designs in this show are worse than the original. Like the original designs were designed to look good as action figures. So
Yeah, they're so
everybody,
boring. Yeah.
they all had the same body type because action figures were they came from the same mold. They all needed to look kind of the same way. And we can talk a little bit about body types as well, because you know, this show does a lot of things that are good with body types, and it does a little bit that's really bad with body types, but it's mostly, you know, pretty good for giving us like
Yeah.
an interesting diverse cast of characters in terms of the way they look and their shape language, and that's really what you want, especially with a show with a, an extended cast that's quite large. It's not like Craig of the Creek large, but
Yeah.
it's pretty large, larger than Avatar. I think Avatar certainly has a lot of side characters, but I don't think those side characters necessarily have the same like episode to episode prominence
Right.
as the
Totally.
princesses of power.
Yeah. Totally. Totally.
Um, and so then there's Andy Stevenson, and Andy Stevenson um, is a very interesting figure. This, I believe, was their first, like this was their first this was their first show running gig.
Mm-hmm.
Andy Stevenson had before that been like either like a storyboard artist or like a background artist on Wonder Over Yonder, which is a show I have not seen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they got that gig from doing like a webcomic in university, like a really popular webcomic, and
Mm-hmm.
just got a
Mm-hmm.
call one day and it was like, come do this for us. And you know, NDS is obviously one of those like ridiculously talented people, just
Yes. I think I think
ridiculously talented.
I think he goes by Nate now, if I remember correctly. Can someone confirm that in the chat actually? Does ND Stevenson go by Nate now? Am I remembering that correctly? If someone
The
can confirm that, that'd be great.
Google page says ND Stevenson.
I think it was a recent thing, so it might not have been updated
I have
yet.
absolutely no idea. If people can confirm that for me,
Yes, Zoe says ND goes by Nate now, and he
goes
has
by
pronouns.
Nate. Okay.
Thank you.
I will say Nate and I will say he. Okay, cool. So,
Nate and ND
yeah,
interchangeable. Okay, thank you.
he's obviously like one of those just ridiculously talented people that just
Yeah,
like
yeah,
through a combination of skill and luck got swept up into this industry and kind of started off small with sort of you know, like peripheral credits in Wander Over Yonder.
Mhm.
And then he got to do She-Ra, and I believe it was really something of a passion project to kind of leap on this and do
Mm-hmm.
like a really clear vision on updating this relic from the 1980s. And it does still have like an 80s energy to it in terms of like the color and the
Yeah,
music at times, and but Zoe, they haven't cancelled the movie. Netflix saved it.
Yeah, it's
Ramona
coming
has been
back.
saved, coming back. So don't worry, you'll get to watch that. Although I don't think he's very involved in its production, but I don't really know. But in either case, yeah, it's. I think a lot of the context of our criticisms of season one of this show needs to be prefaced by he had never showrun an animation before. This was
Yeah.
his very first showrunning credit. And the fact that like so much of what makes the show good still shines through in season one, which is definitely the weakest season,
Yeah.
is a testament to how good he is and how great the team is
Yeah,
but
absolutely. We'll definitely
we'll
get into that.
we'll get into that as we go, but I think it is important to establish, while we will be like mildly critical, because I genuinely didn't like this show when I watched when it was just the first season that had just come out, and I slapped it on my TV and I watched it. I didn't really like it. I was like, okay, this is like when I talk about it now, I describe the writing as functional.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. That's a really good way to put it.
Which I think for the first season is true. Like the writing of the first season is functional, but the character writing is really good.
Yes.
And the character writing would kind of end up becoming the entire focus of the show.
Yeah.
Towards the end of season one and into season two and beyond. The character writing would. I don't know if it was them finding their footing or if they planned this from the start as a team. But like once it becomes clear that the character writing is kind of what takes precedent, and it becomes like a multicast, not quite a character study, but like a multicast kind of character driven show.
Totally.
Toon, I will always say, because I've said this to you before, I know you kind of gave up on the show. Don't be me, because I did too. I gave up on the show after season one, and I didn't go back to it until after it finished. And my friend Lou kind of said to me, no, you got to see it. It gets really good. The animation never gets good, really. Like it gets better. It never gets like Owl House good or something like that. It does not matter because the writing from season two and beyond, particularly like season three and after that, is honestly some of the best like space opera fantasy writing. It's honestly some of the best. It's so good I take it over Avatar any day. I absolutely mean that.
I am willing to say that She-Ra is like the best queer epic I think I've seen. And yeah, I mean definitely hands down in Western animation. There's like nothing. Well, maybe Steven Universe. Steven Universe and She-Ra.
Steven Universe isn't an epic though. Steven Universe is kind of its own thing.
Yeah.
Steven Universe is much more quotidian.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, but yeah, I would say She-Ra's like the greatest, at least in the West, queer epic that we, in terms of story, that we have currently. It's so good.
It's funny. Toon should say he enjoyed the first few episodes on a rewatch because you said exactly the same thing before we started.
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed this season as I was rewatching it a lot more.
I think knowing where they're going with it helps.
Totally. And like seeing how I actually it's kind of similar to the problems I have, not problems, but like criticisms I kind of have a little bit with like Buffy and Angel. Hey, who has their bingo cards out to when I was going to bring up Buffy on stream. But, at the beginning of like those shows, they kind of have to like paint these characters in kind of like broad strokes, right? Like Cordelia is the mean girl, right? And like that's how they have to like establish her character. But it's not until like we actually get moments with them and we get like their characters actually developing and fleshed out that we see that there are layers underneath these like broad strokes, right? And there are like nuances.
For some of them it takes multiple seasons before we even get
absolutely. And we can start to see, especially in season one of She-Ra, like some of those broad strokes like getting place so that we could like see the framework being established. But I've definitely got in my notes like a couple places where like this dynamic is going to be fleshed out and built upon, and like nuance is going to be painted into it as we watch more of the episodes. And I feel like now that I know what some of those nuances are, seeing those broad strokes being portrayed in the first season, I can see them for what they are. Like you said, that it's utility writing, right? Like I can see the framework being built so that the rest of the brilliance can be built on top of that foundation.
Yeah, it's interesting because like it so our setup really is tropey. I will say tropey. I think
Yes,
tropes exist.
trope's a good way to put it.
Tropes. Part of why the writing in season one feels so functional is because it seems to be playing pretty close to certain tropes.
Yeah.
And it then, over the course of like 5, 6 seasons, just like completely tears those tropes apart. You know, all of the
Yeah.
tropes it establishes, it tears them apart. But like the initial setup feels very like, you know, close to the 1980s, or not really, but like in terms of the tropes being used, close to the 1980s show, and close to Avatar as well, with the whole like, you know,
Yeah.
there's a line of princesses of power and called She-Ra, and you know, people like assume that mantle just like the Avatar is a mantle that is assumed, and you know, it's chosen one kind of thing. And if you're like someone like me who's very sensitive to things being tropey to the point that it can sometimes ruin your experience of a thing, you kind of see that and you're like, okay.
Right, totally.
Which I think one of the hardest things about this show, trying to take a bad idea and run with it, is that like the original 80s, like they still have to use the framework of the original 80s show. They still need to use the stupid names.
Yeah, like Glimmer or
in friggin'
Natasa, yeah, Spinnerella.
And they make fun of it. They're self-aware of
yeah.
it. They're like, they kind of have an attitude of like, look guys, we know, right? There's nothing we can do about it. We didn't make the names. Stuff like the evil horde, like Catra makes a comment at the end of episode 1 or 2 where she's like, yeah, they're called the evil horde.
Like, what did you think? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We answer to a lady called Shadow Weaver.
Exactly.
And it's, I mean, that's kind of perfect, isn't it? Because Adora's a big idiot. Like Adora, you can totally believe Adora being the kind of person that could be easily swept into this propaganda, believing she's fighting the good fight. Because Adora's dumb.
Yeah. I think like that's something that like was a little bit of like not a criticism, but like, you know, it felt very functional, right? Like when I first watched the episode, I was like, oh, of course, you know, she's the hero. She has to like realize that the bad guys are evil and then defect, blah, blah, blah. And it felt very like straightforward, right? But then like as I now know Adora and now know her for the big dumb she himbo that she is, it totally fits, right? Like it totally makes sense that she would have been manipulated and fallen for this like ruse in this way, and then also easily, you know, defect to the other side and join the princesses and join the good guys, because she does have a pure heart, right? At her core, and she was being fooled by the horde, and like when Catra does, you know, eventually confront her and be like, no, I mean I knew we were being manipulated, like it makes sense that Adora would be, you know, reacting in that way in opposition to how Catra does, because, you know, Catra is not as dumb as Adora. She like knows what's going on, but also, you know, Adora is unaware you know, of all of what's going on around her. Actually makes sense for her character. And at first it feels a little cheap, but now that we know who Adora is, like it totally makes sense for the story.
But it also establishes something necessary about Catra, which is that Catra really is the slowest to change. She's the slowest to embrace change. Catra, you get very early on, especially with that conversation between her and Catra when Adora's like, bro, we're evil.
Yeah.
And Catra's like, yeah, I know. Catra kind of establishes that she was like perfectly happy to just like have her little slice of the pie.
Yep.
With Adora, like that was her version of the white picket fence.
Yep.
A little dream, you know, 2 kids and a dog, you know.
Yep.
That's her equivalent. Oh yeah, we were going to rule the horde together. That would be our corner of the universe, and that was her little dream. And she is so not willing to change. So it establishes very early on she was perfectly happy to just have that little slice of pie that she wanted, and she's completely like the idea of changing is so, it's not that it's alien to her, it's that she's aggressively against it.
Totally. And we'll dig into why, and kind of I feel like Catra, okay, I'll say one last thing before we get like really into the meat of the discussion. In this house, we love and defend Catra. Catra haters can get fucked, and you are not welcome here. Katra is probably, it's so hard for me to pick a favorite character in the show because they're all so
Because
freaking
they're all
good.
so good,
But-
but like Catra is easily the most emotionally complex.
Yes,
without
yes.
a doubt.
Yeah, and Katra I think is like the best written character on the show.
She's one. Honestly, she's if you took Catra and you put Catra against like every other character in modern animation, Catra would still come up
Yeah,
really,
absolutely.
really high up. Like Korra as well is very interesting. There are some characters in Steven Universe who are desperately complex.
Yeah.
Catra's in that list of like in modern animation, maybe even just beyond animation, just like modern television. Catra is like devastatingly complex.
Oh yeah.
And we will be talking more about Catra as we kind of go along. But something that is established in those first couple of episodes is the dynamic between Catra, Adora, Shadow Weaver, and the psychological, like cognitive effect it has on them as people and why they are the way they are.
Yes, totally, totally.
Adora might discover that she's the chosen one, quote unquote. I'm putting chosen one in quotes because that trope is unpacked in the series in the long run. But she might discover that she is the chosen one when she discovers that she's She-Ra. But she's been the chosen one since she was born, right? Because because of the way she's treated by Shadow Weaver, and Shadow Weaver treats her like she's special, but in like the worst way, in the way that she makes her responsible for everyone else.
Yep.
And on top of that, this is stuff that is mentioned in an overly sarcastic productions video about She-Ra, called Parallel Arcs. I highly recommend everybody goes and watches that video. It's an excellent video that really establishes, but obviously it's spoiler heavy, so be warned. But it also establishes that Catra is made Adora's responsibility, and there's kind of like an inversion to that, which is that Catra thus develops this unhealthy tendency to like blame Adora for all of her problems.
Yes.
Not just because Adora is made responsible for Catra by Shadow Weaver, but also because like Adora is like not even by her own fault is the reason Catra gets in trouble half the time. She's like constantly being compared to her. It's like constantly, oh, why can't you be like Adora? You know, you're such a screw up and such a mess. And so she's like, before she even like acts upon it, she already harbors a little bit of a resentment for her.
Yeah.
And it, you know, these are things that are never not relevant to everything these characters do.
Yeah.
Right? Adora is never not making herself responsible for everyone.
Absolutely.
At the detriment of her own mental well-being. And, you know, the inverse of that is that Catra is constantly blaming Adora for all of her problems and never like looking inward and scrutinizing her own behavior.
Absolutely.
All of that,
absolutely.
You know, even though you don't necessarily pick up on it right away, it's there.
Yeah,
all of that dynamic is
absolutely.
established literally as early as like the first handful of scenes.
This first couple scenes, yeah, no, absolutely. And just one real quick note that folks are saying in the chat before I talk about Catra a little bit more. But yeah, the backlash against Catra, Korra. You know, we saw it even with Lilith in the Owl House. You know, like it's very clear that a lot of the hate kind of stems from misogyny. You know, even doubly if it's a woman of color. You know, that's why I think a lot of unwarranted hate gets thrown at a lot of these characters. And I did just want to acknowledge that and address that because, that's part of the reason why I'm not going to tolerate any hate towards these characters in this space, because it's so clearly coming from that place.
We will talk as well about like the nature of redemption arcs.
Yes. Yes.
But as like a little like pocket take, I won't go into detail on it, we'll talk about it later, but a little pocket take is really that a lot of people will compare Catra to Zuko.
Right.
Which I don't think is fair because I don't actually categorize Zuko as a redemption arc. I categorize Zuko as what I call a realization arc.
Right.
And it's a different thing. And it's all to do with, you know, Zuko rarely actively makes bad decisions of his own accord. Like everything Zuko does wrong is really more attributable to his father. And so Zuko is easier to forgive, whereas Catra actively makes constantly really bad decisions. That's what makes her interesting.
Yeah.
But only if people like just accept that a redemption arc kind of needs to allow people to to
be
screw up in
terrible.
order to
Yeah.
redeem themselves. Yeah,
Exactly. Like you have to be bad to redeem yourself from being
you have to
bad.
be bad to redeem. Exactly. I will also say May says something about Catra having the biggest change of any of the characters in the show. You're absolutely right. I want to be clear. When I say Catra resists change, I don't mean that she doesn't change. Of course she changes.
Yeah.
She just takes the longest to do it.
Yeah.
And
And it's the hardest for her. Yeah.
and it's the hardest for her. And the reason is that she's closed off to change for so long. Like it takes one of the most like unusual characters to ultimately be the one to pull the trigger on that. But like yeah. But we'll get to all
We'll
of
get
that.
to all
Like,
that. Yeah. Yeah. It's
all
really good
this stuff, these dynamics are introduced very early on, when they kind of take like a joyride out of the fright zone.
Yeah.
And they enter the forest, and that's where Adora finds the sword, and Adora ends up meeting Glimmer and Bow, who are the two primary deuteragonists of the show, and them as a trio really are sort of the heart of the series, and then Catra as well sort of turns it into a square. But them as a trio until Catra has her redemption are like the heart of the series, and something I think we can all agree on, despite this show having some kind of issues with the like plot writing. The characters are what keep you watching, because the characters are so like, them being excellently well written aside, they're just like cathartic to watch on like a scene to scene basis. They're just so much fun. They're so cute.
Yeah,
I
love freaking Catra's "Hey Adora." Like that's so good. Like they're just so charming and like so like yeah, they're just a joy to watch. They're fun to watch, and I think like whether or not like the plot, as you said, like kind of gets its footing in the first season is a bit like, you know, not quite. That was like the worst way to say that. The plot doesn't quite get its footing in the first season, but the character writing is so damn good, and the characters are just so likable and charming and like fun to watch that I feel like that's what really carries you through the first season.
And the first season is mostly just about introducing them, right? Like the structure of like half of the first season is just like, here's this princess, and you know, here's Mista, here's Perfumer, here's Entrapta, and so it's just about like, how do we introduce these characters? How do we break them down to their like fundamentals and introduce them in a way that's fun, satisfying? Glimmer and Bow are wonderful. I love the scene where we're introduced to them.
Yeah.
And Bow is like across the chasm and just like yelling at her.
Yeah. They're so likable. Like I think that's really what carries you through the first season.
But even then, like Glimmer as well. Like Glimmer is another very complicated character. And they establish very early on that Glimmer is she's not very strong early on. She becomes incredibly powerful, but at the beginning she's kind of like Willow. She's the Willow of the Buffy Willow. She's the Willow.
Yes. And when we get more into Buffy, I want to talk more about those parallels.
She's like the Willow of the series, but in the sense that she's like kind of weak early on, but also has like a fraught relationship with her mother and a massive inferiority complex, and you can tell that very early on in the way she interacts with Adora, and she's like overcompensating constantly, and you know, Bo is just making buddies.
Best friend squad.
Even though this is just like, as far as he knows, this is just like a dangerous soldier on the opposite side of the fight that he's fighting. He's like, so how are you? What's life like back in the Horde?
Want to come to this party with us? What? You've never been to a party? Let's go.
And but Glimmer is she has a massive inferiority complex that causes her to act out in often funny ways. But then after a certain point in the show, in some very volatile, not very nice ways. I'll leave it at that. But also Karen Fukuhara absolutely crushing it. All the vocal performances are so good, but I love Karen Fukuhara. She absolutely crushes it.
Karen is amazing. She's amazing. All the voice acting is really, really amazing. Catra and Adora's dynamic tune is definitely the core of the show. So it's definitely one of the most compelling aspects of the show.
it's the dramatic core of the show.
Yeah.
I don't know if I go as far as to say it is the core of the show,
Oh
because
yeah,
I think
yeah, yeah.
that would be underselling like the spirit of the show, which is that, I mean, they call it the princesses
Oh
of
right,
power
yeah. Teamwork and power friendship,
for a
of course.
reason,
Yeah.
yeah. In a way that's narratively satisfying as well. It doesn't come
Yeah.
across as like trite.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
and I think that's largely due to the complexity of it. And that again, that is there in season one towards the
Totally.
end when
Totally.
you get like a whole episode at the end of the season, which is like kind of flashbacks. It's they enter the sanctum, and the sanctum starts like basically playing their memories back to them, and it's like a big
Yeah.
like psychoanalytical self-reflection on who they are and the paths they've chosen.
Yeah.
So it's like the idea of friendship and teamwork. It's not the traditional like, yeah, we can do anything
Right.
if we're best pals. It's like, no, like relationships are complicated and messy, and people
Yeah.
are complicated and messy.
Yeah.
And in a world so fraught with conflict,
Yeah. Yeah.
one of the most important and simple decisions we can make is to just fucking get along.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And this show, I think, kind of tackles that theme in a really satisfying way, like you said. It's not saccharine, right? It's not like overly cheesy power of friendship kind of thing, but it just works. It works really well. It's really well written.
Yes. Yeah. And the princesses themselves, let's talk about the princesses themselves, because
Yeah.
they are the structure of the series, introducing them on an episode by episode basis. They're all so great, and they play off of one another in a really fun way, and they never stop playing off of one another in a really fun way.
Yeah, totally.
Like the I think my favorite is the Mamista and Perfumer dynamic, because Perfumer is so like soft edged and like it wants everyone to be happy and harmonious, and
Yep.
Mamista is just like
Whatever.
sassy and like indifferent and like doesn't really care. I mean, she cares about other people's feelings.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
like,
She doesn't
she's
show
not
that she
gonna-
cares. Yeah.
She's not going to pussyfoot around you when pussyfooting is all Perfumer knows how to do.
Yep.
Which
Yep.
is kind of in many ways like part of her arc, but yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, all the characters are just so charming, and like the dynamics are so well done. Yeah, it's just really really good. The first note that I have, yeah, Mermista's just so done with life, totally tuned. The first note that I have is actually on this like first Adora Catra Shadow Weaver scene. First of all, I just love Catra's like cat mannerisms. It's just so cute and funny to me. Adora,
They
like,
never stop being adorable.
yeah, being like, oh, is that a mouse? And her just like hissing, like that's just so cute. And yeah,
Her
this
little laugh brings
yeah.
me so much joy.
Oh yeah, Catra's laugh is just so good. But yeah, this dynamic being established with them, like, right, they're obviously friends. They obviously like each other a lot. They're obviously close. They obviously know each other really well, right? And there's a kinship, right? There's a respect. There's a love, right? There's definitely that there together. And then it's so funny as soon as like Shadow Weaver just shows up, right? Like how Adora's body language changes, right? Like she goes from being like lax to immediately rigid. So we can kind of see like how these relationships are being like established in these like broad strokes, right? We can kind of see like Shadow Weaver being like the commander, Catra being a little bit more flippant, but Adora being more, taking on that responsibility. And like Shadow Weaver is, I think, also one of the most like complex characters of the show in the sense,
tragically so.
Yeah, like her motivations are pretty consistent throughout the entire show, interestingly enough, but like the way that she is flexible in how she pursues her goals is what makes her so interesting.
And I mean, she is amoral in the sense of she's a firm believer in the ends justify the means.
Right. Totally.
And
totally.
The line between seeking power for the greater good and seeking power because she wants power is a line that no matter how consistent her behavior is, it's a line that's constantly blurring.
Yeah.
Like And that's where that motivation thing comes in, because it's
Yeah.
like she, as far as we know in season one, is purely just evil and purely motivated by evil and wanting to crush her
Yeah.
enemies. But as we learn later on in the season, she was at one point in time a member of a highly decorated and highly what's the word, paragonic society of witches.
Mm.
And her name is an inversion of what her original name was,
Right.
which was Light Spinner.
Right.
So she kind of adopted a mantle and became something else. But like, yeah, there's always that fluctuating feeling of like, is it like you're never quite sure if there's a redemption arc on the way. You're just never
Yeah.
quite.
Yeah, totally, totally. Yeah, she's so interesting. And I especially at least want to take a moment and there's another moment later on in season 1, once Shadow Weaver asks Catra to bring Adora back after Adora has defected, where Catra's kind of like no, and then we see like some physical abuse, right, happening between Shadow Weaver and Catra. And I just want to talk a little bit about like this dynamic between Shadow Weaver, Adora, and Catra, and like how messy this is, right? Like Shadow Weaver is very much like like almost a mother figure to like both of them, right? Like they were raised by her essentially. But of course they have this like military hierarchy kind of added dynamic into that, right? So that makes it especially messy, right? Because we can see later on as well too, like Catra does genuinely care about Shadow Weaver. Like when Shadow Weaver is like
in a
hurt,
twisted way, it's still her mother, basically.
yeah, like she doesn't want to see her hurt. Sometimes, right? Like it's she doesn't want to see her Shadow Weaver being hurt by not her in a weird way, right?
Yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah, so there's like that piece of it, but then like there's a piece of Catra I feel like that knows that she's being constantly compared to Adora, that like she feels inadequate, right? Like she feels like she can never like live up to like Shadow Weaver's expectations. So there's a piece of Catra that's already given up on that, right? Like when Shadow Weaver is like, it's surprising to me that you even finished the course, right, in this first scene. And Catra is at first like really flippant, right? She's like, oh, you're always serving up those pep talks, huh? Like, oh, like with her sarcasm, just like brushing it off or whatever. And then we see, Shadow Weaver kind of threaten that, that physical abuse that she has, right? The shadows like creeping onto Catra's face. And then we can see like Catra immediately flip and be like, sorry, Shadow Weaver. So, this attitude that Catra has towards Shadow Weaver, it's like, she knows that Shadow Weaver has these expectations for her, but on one hand, there's a piece of her that knows that she'll never meet that expectation, so she doesn't care or try to.
Yeah.
But at the same time, she's facing the consequences of like her not meeting that expectation and blaming Adora for those consequences, right?
A trigger point for her, and one of the crucial, like one of the many and one of the crucial breaking points for Catra as she continues to spiral.
Yeah.
Is all to do with that cross dynamic between her and Shadow Weaver and Adora, and we will get to that in due course. But it like that is like her flippancy towards Shadow Weaver in season 1, those first couple of episodes.
Mm-hmm.
It hinges entirely on the fact that she possesses Adora, right?
Yes.
Adora's hers. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if Shadow Weaver loves Adora more. Adora loves Catra more, right? Mm-hmm. Adora loves me more. I possess her. She's my possession.
Right.
And so it doesn't matter. But as soon as that's gone and they're pitted against each other, it becomes a very sore trigger spot for her. It's it's complicated writing. It's really intelligent writing.
Yeah.
And I will say this is one of the many reasons I prefer the show to Avatar. Like, don't get me wrong, I like Avatar, I do, but like, Avatar, just to quantify some of my previous hot takes, I really like Avatar. Like, everybody really likes Avatar. It's great. Avatar is really, really good because it's a well-oiled machine that plays everything relatively safe.
Yeah.
And I just don't care that much for things that play things safe. This show, for better or for worse, depending on who you ask, takes some major risks in terms of the depth of the way the characters are written, particularly with Catra.
Totally.
And I think with the exception of Zuko, I think the reason people love Zuko so much is because Zuko and Iroh really are kind of the only characters in the entirety of Avatar: The Last Airbender who have any like real complex psychological depth to them. And that's fine. Like Avatar's just written to be that way. That's not a criticism of that show.
Yeah.
It's just about what appeals to us. And like really all of the main cast, except for Bo. Bo is the only one who seems to be remotely like emotionally healthy.
Yeah. He has like the tamest little conflict with his family, and then like it gets resolved and he's like totally like mentally sound.
Because his dad's they love him.
They love him. They actually genuinely love him. Yeah.
It's interesting for you to bring all that up about Catch, because it's like as soon as that dynamic shift to a hostile one, that the Shadow Weaver immediately becomes like such a sore trigger spot.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so interesting as well too, that you bring that up, like Shadow Weaver as a trigger for Catra, you know, having this animosity towards Adora, right? It's so interesting the way that that's set up. Like you would think Catra would like hate Shadow Weaver and blame Shadow Weaver, but like because of this way that Shadow Weaver constantly compares Catra to Adora and blames Adora for Catra's falling, and also like, you know, punishes Catra when Adora doesn't like, you know, take care of the responsibility, right? Like that dynamic is what leads Catra to blame Adora instead of Shadow Weaver, and I feel like that is so well done, so well established.
It's superb. I feel like there are a few key characters we haven't really talked about yet who we should talk about at least a little. First of all, when Adora leaves, Catra gets a new foil.
Yep.
In the form of the ultimate she-himbo.
Scorpia.
Scorpia, who is just like, Scorpia's perfect. Scorpia, from like the second she's introduced, you're like, you know she's going to be a good guy.
Yeah.
You just know. It's like, he's already a good guy. And Scorpia fits into the Adora category of like, literally just being too dumb to realize she's the bad guy.
Exactly, yeah.
Rationalize any of what she's doing. She's perfect. She's a big, dumb idiot baby.
Yeah, totally.
It's great. The scene when she's introduced is like, your new partner, Force Captain Scorpia, and you've got that imposing like.
Yeah, she's looking all like scary and like imposing, and then immediately she flips.
She's like, Kitty.
Yeah, for episode 5, I literally have 4 notes on episode 5. My 4 notes on episode 5 are: I fucking love Seahawk, LMAO. I fucking love Scorpia in all caps. Mermista is cool, and Adora and Catra have a confrontation. Those are my 4 notes on episode 5.
Let's talk about Seahawk actually, because I love Seahawk as well.
Let's skip to episode 5.
Seahawk. One of the difficulties I think with modern shows of this nature, these like revisionist pieces of media that remake 80s or 90s media, there is a track record. Now, don't get me wrong, I largely believe this track record is overbloated by right-wing critics who are just angry little poopy boys who want to poop in their panties.
Yes.
However, for example, let's take Carmen Sandiego, a show I like, to be clear. I really like that show. All of the men in that show are idiots or assholes, with the exception of the infantile boy who speaks to her over the intercom.
Yeah,
like all of the male characters in that show are just like awful and bad, and I can understand. Like, I don't think we're doing ourselves any favors by alienating audience members that way. And it sets us up to be scapegoats.
Right
now, She-Ra was still a scapegoat for a certain period of time, but like Seahawk is a perfect way to do it, because Seahawk, there's a line. There's a line from Roger Ebert describing a character from another movie called El Secreto de sus Ojos, where he describes one character as being like stupid but not incompetent.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's Seahawk. Like, Seahawk is also a big idiot.
Yes.
And he's like got elements about him that seem really negative on a when you first meet him, like, oh, he's a blowhard and he's like arrogant, but he's actually lovely and he loves people and he's like a great loving friend.
Yeah, he has a big heart, right?
He's got a great big heart, as big as his boob window.
I love the boob windows. Oh my gosh, so good.
And he's like another great voice performance.
Yes, oh, the voice acting is so good.
Adventure and his sea shanties.
Oh, the shanties.
Like his romance with Mimister is great because like he's the perfect character for her because Mimister is so like cold and distant.
Yeah, and he's so
like
goofy.
He just like breaks through it.
Yeah.
So being a himbo who just like inexplicably, for reasons we never really know, and I think that makes the gag work.
Yeah.
Set all of his boats on fire.
Yeah. Oh my god. I love one of my favorite moments. I'm trying to find it in this episode is that moment where, Glimmer's like, do what you do best. And he's like, what are you talking about? And she's like, set your boat on fire. And he's like, yes. And his eyes like light up and he's like so ready for it. I'm trying to find that moment. It's so good.
It's one of my favorite kinds of gags, actually. It makes it even better by the fact they just keep running with it and they never stop. And it literally goes right up until like the end of the series. Him setting his boats on fire thing.
Yeah.
He's made serious enemies, like major, lifelong, dangerous political enemies from setting his boats on fire. But it's the fact we're never given context as to how it happens, and that makes it perfect. It's like one of my favorite like kinds of gag. Like I say it often on stream. I'll say stuff like, "Oh, we don't talk about the Grimsby incident." That's my version of that gag. Like just saying things with no context.
Right, totally.
There's a line in Peep Show. We agreed we wouldn't do the silly voices after that week, and you never know what that week is.
Right.
Like, what the hell is that week? And this is the same, but like they just keep running with it. It's a running gag that they never stop. It just keeps going. Yeah, I love Seahawk. Seahawk in a sea of like Chase Devereaux's. Is that the guy's name in Carmen Sandiego?
I have not watched Carmen Sandiego, so I unfortunately don't know.
In a sea of Chase Devereaux's, we need more Seahawks. Like it's great to revise these characters. Do it by all means. Just like we don't have to make them unlikable in the process.
Yeah,
like, we don't have to. Not unless it would serve the plot in some meaningful way. Bo and Seahawk.
I love Bo's like crush on Seahawk. It's so funny and so cute.
Seahawk is so dashing and he has that beautiful mustache.
Oh, his freaking shiny mustache.
He insists on like slamming his boot on tables and
I don't know why I can't find that moment. I don't remember where it is.
It's like right at the end of the episode when he's feeling like dejected and unwanted and he's about to leave.
Yeah, but it's before they set the boat on fire, right?
You'd like to assume.
I'd like to assume that she tells him to set the boat on fire before they set the boat on fire. Okay. I think it's here. Here we go. Yeah, here we go. Set your ship on fire, Glimmer says, and Seahawk's face just like lights up and the sparkles that come on his face. Oh, that's like my favorite moment that episode. So good. Yeah, totally Hyrule. We love our himbo Seahawk. We love a arson committing sea shanty singing bisexual himbo. We love to see it.
We also have to talk about Entrapta. Like we've
I haven't gotten to Entrapta in my rewatch yet, but I do obviously have lots of feelings about Entrapta.
Also, too, yes, Varric vibes off Seahawk, absolutely. There's a lot of if you took Bo, the tech expert, and you mixed him with they had a love child. It's Varric.
Yeah. But then like made him a capitalist.
But then made him a capitalist.
And that's Varric, yeah.
Yeah, only a character is like simultaneously dumb but also in what's the word? Inventive.
Yeah.
As Varric could possibly believe in the free market.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
It's a fantasy.
Yeah, I kind of want to save Entrapta maybe for a little later. I want to. There's a couple other things in my notes that I want to get through. Let's see. Let me see. Oh, actually, yeah. Let's jump back to episode 1 actually, because I want to talk a little bit about Glimmer and Angela if we want to do that.
We do. Their dynamic is I don't want to go as far as to say short-lived because it isn't.
Yeah, I
And
just
it's
yeah,
given all the screen time it needs. Like it's not like it's underserviced. It's
right.
just that it's a dynamic that tragically is cut short.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, of course. But I did just want to, at very least, just talk a little bit about how this dynamic is like getting established in season one. So, like, this was one of the things where, like, when I first watched the show, I was kind of like, oh, this is like very, again, like that broad strokes kind of idea, right? Like, oh, it's the mom and the teenage daughter, right? Where the teenage daughter like wants to do her thing, and the mom does like wants to keep her safe and doesn't want to let her, go off and be reckless and do her like get into trouble or whatever, right? And Angela even has this line here where she's like, "That's enough, you're grounded," right? And she's very much acting like a mom and her bratty teenager, even though they're talking about this high stakes like rebellion and war and like people are in trouble, right? And yet they're using this language that's like very like, not to use the word grounded, but it's very grounded, right? Like it's
Yeah.
and in that way, I think like it kind of serves a couple of things, right? One, it's like that broad stroke, again, just kind of establishing this dynamic between Glimmer and her mom. The fact that like, Glimmer does want to do these things, but her mom like doesn't want her to do these things, but it's of course under this pretense of keeping Glimmer safe. And then, of course, that then fuels Glimmer's character motivation, right? Even throughout the entire first season of like wanting to prove herself to her
having
mom.
that inferiority complex.
Exactly. And I have a note here in my notes about Glimmer, and again, like I think the character writing is the strongest thing in this first season, and I really love how character driven things are, right? Like later on in this episode we'll see Bo trying to convince Glimmer, right, to go find the sword. And at first Glimmer is like, no, I can't go, I'm grounded, I don't want to get in trouble with my mom. But then Glimmer has this confrontation with her mom, right, where her mom is like, I don't appreciate your tone, blah blah blah, right? And again, it's like that treating Glimmer as like the young child, like that condescension, right? Of course it's coming from a place of wanting to protect, but just like that dynamic. And after this conversation with her mom is what shifts Glimmer's motivation, right? Like, oh, you can't act that way, it's not fair, blah blah blah. We hear like the argument, the door slam, and of course it's very funny because we see like Bo like just leaning against a tree here waiting for Glimmer to show up, and so it's kind of played for laughs here, but like it really establishes that character motivation for Glimmer, I feel, and I really like that because they could have written it in a way where it's like, oh, she's just gonna go find the tech to help the rebellion, but like it's specifically because she wants to prove herself to her mom that I really like that.
I want to point out something else very important here, like a web of dynamics here that are very important. First of all, it's important to establish that even though Micah has not been named or like brought up really, the absence of Micah in the first few episodes, like the inconspicuous absence of Glimmer's dad, like where is he? Does she even have one? The inconspicuous like absence of him leaves a hole that is very important context for why Queen Angela acts the way she does.
Exactly, yeah.
She's lost her husband and the love of her life and the father of her child to decisions she made, and so she like holds herself responsible for that.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is on one hand kind of in many ways an interesting inversion of Adora, but like more importantly, Angela is an interesting inversion of Shadow Weaver, both in terms of her relationship to her daughter and Shadow Weaver's relationship to her quote-unquote daughters, but also because their entire web and their relationship with Glimmer over the course of the series simultaneously is like motherly in nature, right? Especially after, spoiler alert, by the way, we will be kind of like occasionally touching on spoilers where it's conversationally necessary.
Yeah.
Cover your ears. You got 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Angela dies, and when Angela dies, Shadow Weaver in many ways takes the mantle of being Glimmer's kind of mother, sort of.
Right.
In a twisted bad way. So they're like both kind of motherly figures to Glimmer. While also their relationship explicitly revolving around Micah, right?
Right.
Because obviously Micah, something we do discover in season 1, after like learning who Light Spinner is. Micah was her protege and her student, and it's like this bizarre, twisted pseudo
Yeah.
familial relationship, or like web of characters between Glimmer and Shadow Weaver and Angela that comes with weighty implications on Glimmer primarily, like less so Shadow Weaver and Angela, more so Glimmer, like the way Glimmer behaves. And as her inferiority complex begins to evolve into something a little more volatile and a little more aggressive.
Yeah.
And it's very, very interesting stuff that they are kind of planting the seeds of as early as season one.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Totally. All right, cool. Well, yeah, so I feel like the beginnings of that dynamic with Angela and Glimmer, right, are being established here in this first season. And again, it's one of those things where it's being painted with broad strokes, but as the series goes on and as the relationship, as more of the backstory gets revealed, with Micah and with Shadow Weaver, that's one of those relationships that really gets peeled back and the nuances get revealed as we see the dynamics play out, which I think is just so brilliant. And
Exactly.
yeah, I think like at the beginning, it can be easy to dismiss, like, oh yeah, it's just the teenage daughter and the mother who wants to keep her safe. But once we get into like the motivations of like why they are that way, that's what makes it so interesting and so compelling, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it is what makes it more rewarding on a rewatch, because you're like, oh, I get it.
Yep,
I
exactly,
see.
exactly.
I understand.
Yeah.
And I would be very curious to know what the writing process was for that.
Yeah, totally.
Because with Steven Universe, we now know that since the show has ended, we now know with Steven Universe that there was like a Bible, there was like a whole timeline that Rebecca Sugar had figured out from literally before the first episode aired. She knew everything, and you can tell, like rewatching that show, it's all there.
It's all there. Yeah.
And much the same can be said about this, and it's really, I would genuinely be curious to know if it was a case where they had a whole Bible, or if they were just like great adaptive writers who were just gradually building on what was already there and going back and being like, oh, but how do we expand on this dynamic? What can we do to expand on this dynamic?
Totally. I have to imagine they had some idea of where it was going, but yeah, I would be definitely curious to know what the writing process was like for this show.
Yeah, absolutely. It would be, I mean, if anybody knows, just tell us.
Yeah, let us know. Okay, one more thing that I want to talk about here, again, with Catra and Adora, right? So Adora, they go to the woods, they find the sword, they come back, and then Adora is so curious about the sword, she like has to go and find out what's going on, right? And she has to go back. And then we get the scene with Adora and Catra, right? Again, where like Catra doesn't want Adora to leave, right? At first, and then at first, Catra says, okay, great, let me go with you, right? Like she's up for Adora leaving, but she wants to come with her, right? And then when Adora is like, no, I don't want you getting in trouble on my behalf, I need you to stay here, right? And like cover for me and whatever, right? So I feel like, and Catra responds to this in anger, right? Like, so I find this like, just again, it's one of those seeds that gets planted that I think it is just so relevant later, right? Where the like Catra is a character that her motivations stem very deeply from like her emotions, and she's very, very, very emotional, and she's one of those characters that the way that I like to describe it is that like her emotions are very physical. Like when she feels her strong emotions, it manifests in her like very physically. And we'll see this a couple times, like, in this first season when she feels abandoned by Adora, she cries and she punches her pillows and she like tears her bed apart. And, she feels her emotions in her body. And that physical feeling is almost what like motivates her actions moving forward, right? Because she hates that feeling so much. She hates feeling, out of control, that she's like worthless, that people are leaving her. She like hates that feeling of abandonment so much that she does everything in her power to avoid feeling that. And since she has so little control over her surroundings, the only thing that she can control is her attitude, right? And so she shuts herself off. She closes herself down. She denies her emotions, right? She shrugs things off. She says that she doesn't care about things that she does actually deeply care about, right? It's all to protect herself from this feeling that she physically feels when she gets this abandonment or this hurt or this pain. So I just like, again, like this is one of those moments where she's feeling that abandonment, I feel, which is really important.
Part of what makes Scorpia a perfect foil to her, because Scorpia is so like not only like emotionally self-assured, but also very emotionally open. She does not close her emotions off and like bottle them up and
totally.
Unfortunately, she is also prone to being manipulated, but she's also like she perhaps sees too much of the good. You know,
that's
and
interesting.
I think in Scorpia, Scorpia is the litmus test, I think, for when Catra has reached the point of almost no return.
Right, totally.
But yeah, everything you're saying is correct. To quote Double Trouble, wow, this is worse than I thought. You're a mess.
Yeah, Catra's a heaping mess. A gay heaping mess. A mess of a lesbian, if we ever did see one.
A mesbian, if you will.
A mesbian. Oh my gosh. Yeah, a gay disaster, right? Yeah. I really think that the writing with Catra is so good. And I think that's part of why I think she's one of my favorite characters too, because like, you know, a lot of people will try to pull this line that I hate when people say this, because I feel like it's so reductive and so unhelpful. People will say something like, someone's trauma doesn't justify their bad actions.
And what's annoying about that is that the show agrees with you.
Exactly. It's so frustrating to me when people say that, because I feel like they're so missing the point of how trauma informs our actions.
Yes.
Like,
it's not about trauma excusing Catra's behavior. It's about trauma helping us to understand why she is the way she is, right? But it isn't until she reaches a point of no return where she is basically forced to realize that actually she's the problem. Like, she's the common denominator in all of her problems. It's her fault. Like, and a character, I don't know how anybody could misinterpret this, because a character literally says this to her. It's like, you're the problem.
Exactly.
Yeah, like, you are the problem. Like, like the trauma is tragic and sad, and it helps us as an audience to understand the psychology of how she is and why she behaves like she does, and her like devastatingly self-destructive tendencies.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's not like when people throw that out there, like trauma doesn't, like, yeah, we know.
Like, we know that. Like, what are you trying to say with that? Like, the show is even saying that. So, like, what does that constructively say? And it's really, I mean, I know why people are saying it. They're just saying it as an excuse to hate on Catra, right? I mean, they just want to, and like, I feel like that's so frustrating to me too, because like, I feel like if that's how you're going to be talking about like this character, like, how do you then approach people in real life that deal with trauma and like make mistakes because of their trauma, right? I mean, like,
that's exactly, yeah. It betrays a honestly an alarming lack of empathy.
Yeah.
You know, with Zuko, like it always comes back to Zuko, because Zuko is the one that people always compare it to, and it drives me nuts, because Zuko is not a redemption. Like, the only thing that Zuko really does wrong of his own accord, like an actual action he makes, is his choice to betray Ira at the end of season 2, and that's like something you can tell he immediately regrets.
Yeah.
Even if he doesn't say it out loud, it's clear he immediately regrets it. Like, there's the look between the two of them, and he will like obviously go and see Ira and like shout at him in prison, because he's just like ashamed of himself. Like, Zuko, it's very, very, like, the whole reason he's doing anything he's doing is because he was banished by his father, and he's desperately trying to like make his father happy. Therefore, his abusive father is the one who's like fundamentally responsible for everything he does. Right. And the show makes that very, very clear. Like, he was banished in the first place for like trying to defend a squadron of troops from being sent to their deaths. Like,
yeah, yeah,
Zuko was never the bad guy, and everybody knows it. Like he does not have a redemption arc. He has a
Right.
realization arc. He has an arc where he realizes what he's been doing, right?
Right.
But in terms, like, what does he actually have to do? Like, to you know, he gets like one episode with Katara that I guess you could look at as like a redemption, but it's not really redemption so much as just like earning her trust, kind
Right.
of. Which it's like a bottle redemption arc, but it's
Right.
not really the same thing as a character like Catra who makes massive, devastating decisions that like ruin her own life and the
Yeah.
life of everybody around her. And it's like, I when I made my Lumity video, and I obviously, you know, talking about Lumity, it's important to talk about Steven Universe, and it's important to talk about She-Ra, because they're like, and you know, that and Korra as well, they're important stepping stones in that trajectory. And I would always get comments from be like, the number of people like, oh yeah, Catra constantly trying to maim and kill the protagonist. Like, yeah, I know, that's what she needs to be redeemed from, you dumb assholes.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, exactly. Everybody says they want enemies to lovers until the enemies actually start trying to kill each other.
And it's audience as well. Like Tuneful makes a really, really good point here that I'm actually going to expand upon.
Yeah.
Where he says, Tom, do you really expect the terminally online to actually pay attention to what they're watching? Toon, you're absolutely right. And you touch upon something very important here, which is that unfortunately a lot of people who consume only this type of media have absolutely no sense of nuance at all. And that's a real shame.
Yeah.
You know, I talked, when you and I have talked about this privately before, I would typically bring up a film, an excellent film called Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. And if those in the chat have not seen it, go watch it. It's really good. That film, right, in less time, so don't anybody be giving me crap about time, like the show doesn't have enough time to redeem it. Like, fuck off with that.
Yeah.
You know, Three Billboards is what? Like, it can't be any longer than like two and a half hours max.
Right.
And that's like max. It's probably less than that. It's an hour 55. It's 2 hours long, right? There is a character in that movie who is a racist cop who like beats up a guy for hanging a billboard. Like, he beats a guy almost to death. He's like really bad news. He's like an awful man. And he has a redemption arc, and it's really compelling and devastatingly sad. And you ain't seeing any fans of Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri complaining about Sam Rockwell's character having a redemption arc, because they're adults. They're adults with a sense of nuance and a sense of like understanding complex situations. And it's like, you know, someone redeeming themselves doesn't mean excusing what they did. You know, like that movie and She-Ra as well go through the motions of like, we nothing will make what they did okay, but we need to process it somehow, you know, totally in a way that strangely comes down to Glimmer, weirdly, with you know, Glimmer ends up being the linchpin there with Catra kind of and then discussing it, and then, you know, it's Catra is a fantastic character. We love Catra in this household.
Yes, we love and defend Catra in this house. There's kind of one more big point that I want to talk a little bit about with this first episode here. You know, Adora finding the sword, the kind of mystery getting established between, like, you know, who is She-Ra, and then Light Hope, you know, mysteriously like showing up, and kind of this mystery about like who is Adora, right? Like, why does Adora turn into She-Ra, right? Like, there's this mystery getting established here. And there's something I want to point out as well too, right? With Adora not necessarily like trusting Glimmer and Bo, right? Because she's like, oh, princesses are evil, they like want to hurt us, blah blah blah, right? And so she doesn't trust Glimmer or Bo, and yet the linchpin moment in this first episode, where, you know, Adora finally does turn it properly into She-Ra, right? At towards the end of this episode, is when she is attempting to save Bo and Glimmer from, you know, this giant bug monster thing, right? And so, you know, Bo, you know, we talked a little bit about this line already, right? Bo says, like, your army's literally called the Evil Horde. How could you not know? And Adora's like, who calls us that? And Bo's like, literally everybody, dude. I don't know why you didn't know this. And, you know, Adora explains, you know, to me, they're just my family. They raised me and took care of me and everything like that.
Because Adora's never been on the. I don't think at this point in the story, this is Adora's first time in the field.
Exactly. Yeah, she's
You
never even
know,
like left the fright zone, right?
and the characters are at fundamental, like, formative moments in their lives at the beginning of the story. According to like various Reddit AMAs and other AMAs and like panel discussions, the all of the characters, all of the main characters, so excluding like side characters like Mimister and that, all of the main characters who have like arcs in the show
Yeah.
are like 17, 18 at the beginning of the story, and by the end they're in like their early to mid 20s.
Right. Yeah.
So it's a different kind of coming of age story.
Yeah.
It's not the coming of age like Stand By Me, you know.
Right.
It's coming of age like becoming an adult, like actually becoming an adult.
It's more the Buffy coming of age, right?
Buffy coming of age, and they like Adora has never been on the field before. This is her first field experience. Like she immediately goes out there and like pretty much instantly is like, oh wow,
Yeah.
I'm a doofus.
Yeah.
I beefed it.
Yeah, so this is like a really important moment, right? For the entire, it really sets up this allegory for the entire series, as well as, again, like that core of like Adora's character arc, right? And I find like this is so important, and we kind of touched on this, like I should say, I and you touched on this a little bit on the channel previously already, in the Wolfwalkers video, actually, right? So at that point when I had made that video, I had not actually watched She-Ra yet, but Tom, you edited that video for me, and there's a line that I talk about in that video about transformation being a queer allegory, right? Especially in Wolfwalkers, with the wolf transformation being like almost a non-binary allegory in that story. But in that video, you had actually used a clip from She-Ra when I, you know, said that line as an example of transformation being this like queer allegory, right? And I want to talk a little bit about that and how this transformation is used in a symbolic way, and how that even just immediately gets established here in this first episode, right? So this whole show is about Adora and like her transformation into She-Ra and like what that represents. I should say that's one of the many things that the show is about. And you know, this linchpin moment here where Adora is learning the truth about the Horde, right? And she's learning that what she had known has not necessarily been true, and she's questioning, you know, her moral standing and her loyalties and everything, right? And she sees Bo and Glimmer in trouble from the giant bug, and she has every opportunity to grab the sword and run away and escape here, right? But instead, she sees them in trouble. She sees the sword. And then she uses this moment to fight back and protect Glimmer and Bo after, of course, learning the truth about the Horde, right? And so this is the turning point for Adora. This is the moment where she defects the Horde, right? And she decides like she is going to question what she has learned, right? And really take on that questioning, right? Which is something that Catra is not able to do, you know, as we learn in the next episode. So I feel like it's so important here that is the catalyst almost. That is the linchpin that causes the transformation, right? I feel like that's really important. And as we kind of explore what this transformation of Adora into She-Ra represents as it continues to, you know, get developed throughout the series, I want to at very least establish what the starting point for this transformation was. Adora deciding that she's going to question the Horde, she's going to question her loyalties, and that she's going to, you know, take on the responsibility of protecting Glimmer and Bo instead of escaping. This is what causes this initial transformation, initial shift. And I just want to put a pin in that. I feel like that's going to be really important as we explore what this transformation represents later on down the line.
And something like a definition that's constantly evolving in terms of what the actual being of She-Ra is, and how it relates to what the prophecy is around She-Ra, and you know, Madame Raz says at one point like She-Ra's not a sword.
Yeah.
You know, and so that ties into another dialogue of who am I really internally? Who am I? It's very Steven Universe in that sense, with like, you know, I am my mother. you know, it was me all along, etc., etc. Like, who am I really?
Yeah,
In
exactly.
a confusing dialogue where obviously Shadow Weaver's saying one thing and the Rebellion are saying another thing, and um and then Light Hope is, oh, we haven't even talked about Light Hope.
We haven't really talked
Um
about Light Hope at all yet. Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot to be said about Light Hope, but yeah, Light Hope obviously is just like a computer program as far as we know. Who's very like, oh, you have this vague prophecy to fulfill, that she's like pointedly holding her cards close to her chest on that for reasons you kind of like on a first viewing come across as like generic, like, oh yeah, it's a generic
Oh yeah,
prophecy. But then
mysterious like entity. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
when you get into it, you're like, oh, she's actively, specifically trying to withdraw information from her
Yeah.
for manipulative reasons.
Yeah, yeah. That also is really, really well done. Yeah, because like I feel like this show, right? Like when you watch this first episode, at least when I watched it the first time, again, it felt very utility, right? Like, okay, the protagonist, she has to be the good guy and defect and like join the rebellion, of course, right? And she has to realize like what she's been doing was wrong all along and change her motivations, right? But then the show, slight spoilers for later seasons, but then the show fucking does it again, right? And I feel like the way that is kind of brought back again, it doesn't feel redundant. It doesn't feel like, oh man, we're doing this again, like it's the same twist. It feels kind of brilliant because like since this first, I say it's a twist, but we all knew that the Horde was evil, right? But this first realization for Adora that like what she's been doing was wrong all along feels very obvious, right? And then when we learn it again later on, that's when it's like, oh, we didn't see this coming again, right? So yeah, I thought that was really, really, really brilliantly done.
Yeah, it's kind of I mean, that really is a dramatic high point in the series, that moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that is the point where you begin to realize truly what the show is doing and how it starts to unpack those tropes, because it's like it really it completely abandons the whole chosen one thing. It's like, no, there's no chosen one. I mean, the show is called The Princesses of Power. That's the point. There's a reason why it's called that.
Yeah.
You know, and in the end, the chosen one really ends up being chosen two, because she's like physically incapable of doing what her chosen one was meant to do.
Yeah.
And so chosen two end up doing it. It's great. And it's like, yeah, it's like,
yeah,
the whole prophecy thing, it's all bullshit. It like completely throws it out the window. It stops being a high fantasy and it turns into a space epic. It's crazy. It takes all of this stuff and throws it out the window. All of the stuff with, like, okay, Avatar Roku's really cool. I really like Avatar Roku. The relationship between Adora and the implicit relationship, because there is no actual relationship, you know, in the same way as there is with Aang and Roku. But the character of Mara is way more interesting.
Totally. Also, way more hot. Mara is like the most beautiful woman.
The most beautiful woman. Like,
literally, the show designers, like the character designers on the show, were literally like, let's just make the most beautiful woman imaginable, and that's Mara.
the kind of like archetypal Amazonian warrior goddess, and but she's so human as well. That's what I love about Raz as well as a character. Is Raz it kind of similarly to a character like Seahawk. Is so like she has the capacity to just bring out the humanity in people by being like simple and not really caring about. She doesn't care about pretense. Whatever. She's an old lady who like sees all of time at once. Yeah, the show is really, really good at like big dramatic reveals. As well.
Absolutely.
There are many of those. There are many of those with Mara, which we'll get into. But God, I mean, season one, it feels good to kind of look back on it and know where it's going. It's just such a shame so many people drop it because they aren't quite swung along with the narrative just yet. And it's so hard to be like, there's a pro ZD video about it as well. It's like, no, trust me, it gets really good.
Just trust me.
You gotta trust me. And it really does, but like at the very least, it crosses the most essential kind of. It satisfies the most essential thing for me, at least, which is that the characters are all just super likable and
absolutely.
settle into the gist of just like enjoying them being likable and just watching every episode and being like, yeah, no, I like these characters. They're fun.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, so my notes kind of in the beginning of the season 2, episode 2 part are really like, again, just kind of a testament, and also just like a understanding of like why season 1 maybe feels a little bit flat, is again, like the writing is a little utilitarian, but like I love it a lot upon second viewing, because again, like we can see where it's going, right? Like for example, right in this beginning section where they're running away from the monster, Bo has like this line where he's like, oh, like you've never teleported 3 people before, right? So we're kind of establishing the limits of Glimmer's powers, but this is an important kind of foundation to set up in this first season, because as we see Glimmer's character arc develop, we also see how her powers kind of work along in tandem with her character developing as well, right? Like her powers grow alongside her own growth, and just like that seed getting planted here in this first couple episodes is important, right? But maybe feels a little utilitarian upon first viewing.
Yeah, I think it's that's the trick, isn't it? Like when you look at a show like Avatar: The Last Airbender, I described Avatar: The Last Airbender as a well-oiled machine that takes no risks.
Yeah.
And because of that, like it's fair, it's got a much more consistent quality from start to finish.
Right.
It does not have what She-Ra has, which is like an ascension of quality, like a very rapid ascension of quality, and an ascension of drama, like the ramping up of drama from the end of season 1 onwards, and the way things just get like crazier and crazier and crazier. But yeah, I don't know. I'm curious, like how when we were. I did feel the need to preface to you when we watched it together. I felt the need to preface to you, like, yeah, okay, just don't expect pure gold in season 1. You kind of just need to sit with it. But I'm curious to know what your, like, having now seen all of it, what your perspective is on it.
Yeah.
Having now watched the whole thing for the first time.
Yeah, totally. I would say, like, I'm obviously definitely enjoying season 1 a lot more upon rewatching it. I can see the bricks and of the foundation getting laid down for where the mansion is getting built, right? Like I can start to see the beginnings of that. So in that sense, I find a lot of season 1 to be really brilliant upon rewatch, because I can sort of start to see those beginnings being established. That being said, like I feel like the flaws going back to it are a little bit more glaring as well as I rewatch it. Like one of the things that I feel like the show kind of throughout the entire show, but like it could have been improved in season 1 for sure. But I feel like the world building is something that leaves a little something to be desired. In this first episode, when they go to like the Whispering Woods, and they're like, oh, we've never, no horde has ever come out of the Whispering Woods and all this stuff, right? Like it doesn't feel very like believable in a weird way. I don't know. I guess when it comes to when it comes to world building, I feel like the show that really hit the gold standard was Amphibia. Like Amphibia, right? You really like feel the setting and the location and like where everything is, and like it feels like a very grounded, lived-in place. And I just, especially in the first season, but kind of throughout the entire show, I just don't really feel that with Eternia. Like I don't get a sense of like location and like that kind of thing.
On one hand, it kind of works to its benefit, because it means they can just like leave the planet for a whole chunk of the show, and it's you don't feel like displaced or anything. Obviously, Avatar: The Last Airbender is kind of the gold standard for that. Avatar has such excellent. I feel I've been dunking on Avatar a lot, but Avatar really does have just like the absolute gold standard of fantasy world building. They do it so well.
Like something I would say for Eternia is like, I don't know what a normal day in Eternia looks like, right? But I know what a normal day in Ba Sing Se looks like, and so that's kind of something that I wish we could have gotten a little bit more in the show. But I also understand that that's not necessarily like it doesn't necessarily detract to not have that,
Yeah, it's not the focus of the show. I think that the difficulty is that there aren't really, in terms of the major locations in the show, there aren't really any normal locations, like quotidian locations,
Right.
is what I use to describe Steven Universe. Steven Universe has Beach City, and you get to spend loads of time with Beach City and its citizens. But like Bright Moon is a castle, right? It's
Right.
a political hub. It's a castle. It's where the military is based. It is not
Yeah.
a city. It is the hub of that part of the world, right?
Yeah.
And we get to see some of the smaller villages. Like I like the episodes with the smaller villages. You do get to see some of the smaller villages. In the show's defense, I think a lot of the reason, or at least this is my justification of it, a lot of the reason we don't get to see many of those locations is because a lot of them are destroyed. Like
Yeah, that's true.
they're in the middle of a very, very hot war. Certain locations I agree with you. Like I do think this is, if of all the criticisms of the show, this is the most realistic one.
Right.
I would have very much, I can't even remember what it's called, Mamista's City. I would have liked
Oh,
to have seen
yeah.
more of that, because that falls at one point.
Right.
And I
Right.
would have
Totally.
liked to have felt that a little bit more than you do.
Yeah, exactly. So
Um,
I think like the world building is probably the thing that I wish was a little bit better about the show, but it doesn't ruin the show for me that that's not necessarily that strong, because the characters are what really drive the show for me, right? And I feel like that's what drives the show for most people in general. And the character writing is just so strong. The characters are so likable right off the bat in season 1, 2. Like I really love Bo. Like he doesn't really have a complex arc. He doesn't really have that like kind of, I mean, obviously he plays a very critical part in the story of like, you know, the story centers around this idea of friendship being the power that, you know, gives us strength. And Bo is kind of like the heart of the group in a lot of ways, right? And the glue that kind of keeps everyone together a lot of the times. And so he's not a very complex character, but like he's so freaking charming. Like I have a note just in the second episode here that's literally just Bo is so charming. Like the way that he like talks to Adora, and like the way that he's like so friendly, and the way that he genuinely seems to like care about her and like see her heart, right? Like I feel like even though like in season 1 we're not getting too deep into the complexities quite yet, that's almost like okay, just because like the characters are just so like fun to watch and so damn likable that it's a little
yeah,
bit forgivable that we're not that crazy in season 1 quite yet.
it is. Yeah, I agree. Not every show can be all of those things. You know, even Steven Universe isn't all of those things.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
it's about what they're trying to be. You know, Steven Universe is a great character show. It's a show with great world building. It's not a great space opera because it's not
right,
trying to be a great space opera. Like
right,
people who treat it like a space opera are always the ones who are disappointed with how it concludes, and it
exactly,
leaves me wondering what the hell they were watching the show for.
right, totally,
You
totally,
know, um, the only other major location we get is the friggin' fright zone, and
right, exactly,
there is no normal day in the fright zone.
yeah. But I
Although
also,
ironically, I do feel like the most normal, like the closest we get to seeing normal days do happen in the fright zone. Like
that's
weirdly,
true, yeah, the trading
they're making a
exercises, yeah.
they're making a birthday cake out of their ration bars and stuff
Oh
like that, which I
yeah.
really
Oh my
like.
gosh. Yeah, I really like that too. And I do also agree with what Toon says in the chat here, that sometimes the flaws can add a bit of the charm to the show as well. And I feel like that's definitely the case with Shira. Like season 1 has so much charm and just so much charisma, right? Like I feel like even though we can kind of see like, you know, the stale writing a little bit, like, oh Glimmer, you can't never teleport 3 people before, right? Like that feels a little dry, but like it's coming out of Bo's mouth, and I love Bo, so like I enjoy it, right?
Yeah,
um yeah, definitely Steven Universe discourse is its whole other can of worms,
yeah,
but
an
totally agree.
exhausting can of worms.
Yeah, but totally agree that Steven Universe should not be treated as a space opera. If anything, She-Ra is way closer to a space opera than
She-Ra is a space opera. It
yeah.
just is one. It's not close to one. It just is
It
one.
literally is one. So I feel
It just
like
is
people should
one.
just watch this instead of Steven Universe if that's what they want, right?
But also, they're missing out. Steven Universe is dope.
Yeah, it's the best. I love Steven Universe.
Steven Universe has better music than I love the show, but the music, the main theme of the show, I don't like it at all. We skip it every time.
Yeah. We always skip the theme song. Yep.
I have to use the bathroom, but I will be back in a
Yeah.
moment.
Go ahead. Um Yeah, so I also really like, when I first watched the show, I was kind of like, oh, everyone's like just changing their minds really quickly. Like Glimmer accepting Adora seems really fast. Bo obviously is that doesn't surprise me that he accepts Adora because he's just like that kind of person, right? But as I rewatch the show as well, I feel like I can see, the struggle a little bit more of Glimmer, like not necessarily wanting to trust Adora right away. So I feel like that's something like maybe on first watch you might be like, oh, it's kind of a little fast, but as I rewatch it again, I feel like no, they kind of did what they needed to do, right? I also will say that I really love um so yeah, so they get to the outside, and they're escaping, and they are trying to get Adora back to Bright Moon. Actually, let's see if anyone's saying anything in the chat here. Nope, not yet. Okay. So yeah, I think like this is important here too, right? Where Adora could have escaped at any point, but she doesn't, right? She makes this choice. And I feel like this is also kind of important when we talk a little bit about this idea of like the chosen one and like what is Adora's quote unquote destiny, right? And I feel like this show kind of breaks down that chosen one trope really well, and actually again like in a kind of similar way to the way that they do it in Buffy, right? So like in season 1 of Buffy, for example, they tell Buffy that she is the chosen one, that she has this destiny, that she's the one that is chosen to fight against vampires and demons and all that good stuff, right? And she actually struggles with it a lot in the first season, right? They are there's kind of a back and forth with Buffy, and her entire arc in the first season is accepting her role as the Slayer and accepting her destiny to fight the vampires, because throughout the first season she wants to be a normal teenager. She wants to join the cheerleading squad. She wants to like go to the dances, right? And all this other stuff, right? Like she just wants to be a normal kid, but her duty as the Slayer comes into conflict in what her desires are. And at the end of the season, she actually decides that she's going to stop being a Slayer.
I leave for 2 minutes and it turns into a Buffy stream.
I'm literally just talking about Buffy, but I'm talking about this parallel between Buffy and Adora here, right? So at the end of the first season of Buffy, Buffy finds out about this prophecy, and she decides that she is not going to be the Slayer anymore, and she decides to quit, and she decides to leave. And they are saying like, no, it's going to be really bad, like people are going to die, it's going to be terrible if you don't fight this thing. And she's like, I don't care, I'm quitting, I don't want to do this anymore, right? And then she has like this realization with her friend of like how much danger people are really going to be in, and when she sees her friend in so much fear, she makes the conscious choice to embrace her destiny and be the Slayer and like fight evil, right? And I feel like that is a really important cornerstone of her character. The fact that like, yes, people are telling her that it's her destiny to do this, but at the end of the day, it's her choice, and she makes that decision herself to do it because that's who she is. That's who that's like her moral compass guiding her to make those decisions. And I feel like that's very similar to what Adora is going through here, right? Where Glimmer has this line where she's like, you could have left at any point, why are you still here? But Adora makes a choice and she decides to stay with them. I want to figure out what's happening to me, right? And then later in the next episode with Madame Raz, she'll kind of reaffirm that choice again, and she'll say, yes, I want to fight in the rebellion, right? So I feel like that's a really important deconstruction aspect of like that chosen one trope, right? Like, no, it's not actually being forced on her. This is her conscious decision of her wanting to do this because that's who she is. So yeah, again, more parallels to Buffy there.
Yeah, I mean, to bring it back to what you mentioned before about that like critical moment where she picks up the sword to save Bo and Glimmer, she does that before she even knows.
Yeah,
Like, she doesn't even know about the prophet, and I mean, the prophecy turns out to be bullshit anyway. But she doesn't like even know about any of that
right,
when she chooses to make that decision.
right, exactly,
You know,
exactly. Yeah, so this theme of choice is a really big one in Buffy, and I feel like it's playing a big part in Adora's character arc here too.
except that Bo is way better than Xander.
Bo is like Xander if
No,
Xander.
I'm gonna stop you right there and say no. Bo is not like Xander. If anything, that's why Bo is great. Like they have nothing in common.
They're both like the heart of the group, right? Like their function is to like keep everyone together, and but yeah, Bo
Isn't it?
does not have any of the incel complexities that Xander has.
Is Xander the heart of the group? I feel like Xander's like his role in the group kind of evolves and changes. Like he starts as like the comic relief,
Yeah, no,
and then
Xander's
that
very much the heart of the group, right? He's the
I don't
one.
know. I
He's
feel
the
like
one. He's the one
he
at the beginning
doesn't.
of season 4 where he's like, what would Buffy do? And um,
Yeah, I get that, but also he actively kind of tears them apart sometimes, and also the stuff he does with Angel, like I don't know.
that's just because he's a teenage boy who sucks.
In either case, all that matters is that Bo is better than Xander.
Yeah, Bo's also got the midriff going for him.
It's like the whole episode with his dad's where
Yeah,
he has a critical moment where he needs the
the
midriff to show in order
midriff.
to save the day. That's like one of the dumbest, most brilliant, stupid. I love it. Like
It's
the
that's
writers,
probably yeah, that's one of my favorite running gags in the show is Bo's midriff.
even on his tuxedo, his
Yeah,
shirt has the midriff cut out.
it's so good. Oh my god, so good.
When are Bo's dads introduced? Are they introduced in season one?
I
I'm
think it's a
trying
season 1.
to remember. Surely they are.
I think so.
No,
No, it's
no, they're
season 2.
not. They first appeared in Reunion in the seventh episode of season 2.
Oh, I see, I see.
Have we yet exhausted all of your like main notes for the
No,
first
I
5
have
eps?
I have more notes.
Give me more notes. Throw them at
Okay,
me.
let's see. Let's see. Okay, so let's talk. Okay, first of all, Adora being a horse girl is adorable, and I love it, and she's so funny. Adora's face when she sees all this cute stuff. I also just want to talk a little bit about like this party scene too. I mentioned this a little bit while you were in the restroom, but I'll just say it again too. Like when I first watched the episode, I did kind of have that feeling a little bit where again it feels very utilitarian, right? Where like oh the good guys have to realize that Adora is good and like accept her, right? And again, Adora has to like realize like the whore's evil and go against them, right? And at first it might feel a little like fast because it's just happening in these first couple episodes. But as I rewatch it, I kind of disagree with my initial assessment of it that it did go too fast. And I feel like we got what we needed to get, right? Like Adora being just like an adorable she himbo throughout this entire party, which really like gets that's the thing that gets Glimmer to like her, right? Like she's just so freaking adorable and charming, and like Glimmer's seeing
Her
like
name is Adora. Everybody
exactly,
adores her.
literally, and like the fact that she's just so like pure and like naive and innocent, right? Like I feel like Glimmer seeing that is kind of enough to get Glimmer to turn her feelings on Adora and like accept her right into the best friend squad. Obviously, Bo is a lot faster to accept Adora than Glimmer is,
Well,
but
Bo kind of immediately does because Bo is Bo.
yeah, exactly. That's just who he is, right? And then yeah, Adora seeing the horse for the first time is hilarious and adorable. Of course, she's a horse girl. Typical.
I love that bit. Who voices Adora? I still don't know. I never remember her name.
I
Voice
actually don't
actor.
know.
Let's have a look. Amy Carrero
Yeah.
absolutely crushes it.
Yeah.
They all crush it, but she's like her vocal delivery is so consistently like just so funny.
Yeah, it's majestic.
What is that?
Yeah.
I think my favorite line delivery from her. I mean, Drunk Adora is in a world of her own. We need to talk about Drunk Adora. I refuse to end this stream until we talk about Drunk Adora.
Okay.
I think my favorite line delivery is right at the end. I'm breaking our rule here. I'm talking about an episode from like the last season when Wrong Hordak has learned how to wink, but she was not present. She was not present for any of that, so he just like knows how to wink now, and he like winks at her, and she's like, "Did you just
wink
did you just wink at me?"
Yes. Oh my god, that's so good. I love this line too. This is one of my favorite lines too, where Adora's like, "This is the best day of my life." So good, so good. The voice acting is so good. Yeah, so Adora being a horse girl is hilarious and funny and adorable, and I love it. And yeah, Bo just being like, "Come on, you like her too," and this Glimmer just reluctantly admitting, like, "Yeah, I do find her very charming."
I love Drunk Adora, not just because Drunk Adora is absolutely hilarious, but Drunk Adora is a great like pocket study for the philosophy they took to writing this show, because
Right.
there are certain tropes. I think Drunk Adora is the first sense you get that there are certain tropes that they're willfully ignoring or
Yeah.
willfully like subverting or throwing out. And like a very, very common trope, Adora as a character, right, she's surprisingly like not the everyman. She's not like the main protagonist as you would normally see them in this kind of multi-character like archetype
Right.
kind of thing. She's actually the muscle.
Right. Yeah.
She's the muscle. She like Bo is smart. I think in many ways Glimmer has more of the kind of like characteristics, I think, of your typical protagonist of this ilk. But like
Right.
Adora's she hits things. That's her thing.
Yeah.
She got a big sword and she punches things, and she's real dumb. And of course, like you have to have the episode where the muscle gets like manipulated. The muscle's always the one that can be manipulated. They can be like brainwashed or whatever, and the 5-man band becomes a 4-man band who has to fight the muscle. And like you get it with the Hulk, you get it with Thor, you get like there's always an episode when it happens. And it's like not really all that compelling ever when it happens. They almost do that. They have that whole episode when Entrapped is introduced. And it's like a virus, and that's also one of the first hints that this is actually a sci-fi in disguise as a fantasy,
right?
Because like all this fantasy stuff is actually technology, like really, really advanced technology from a dead civilization,
right?
But it gets a virus and it infects her sword, and it obviously turns her into like a big angry demon. But they immediately get the sword off her, and what we instead get is way better, and that is a drunk mess. A happy drunk mess.
Right.
Just like,
yeah, it's really funny.
Does nothing of value for the entire episode except like press buttons and go missing.
Yeah, I really like that they took that in that direction too. It's a lot more fun, and yeah, it just works for the show.
It's what they do with really everything, really. Any of the tropes they take, they kind of take them and they mess them around and do interesting things with them. And Drunk Adora is a fun little like pocket study of that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so one more note that I want to talk about in season 2 here. I want to talk about this scene between Catra and Adora. I feel like this is, again, a really important foundation being established here for how their dynamic will continue to go forward throughout the entire show as well, right? So first of all, Adora trying to like kind of reason with Catra, being like, this is a civilian town, they're innocent people. Catra being like, yeah, Shadow Weaver's freaking out. This line I want to point out too, where she says it'd be funny if she weren't such a terrible person, right? So again, like this attitude that Catra has towards Shadow Weaver, where like she tries to tell herself that she doesn't care about what Shadow Weaver thinks, right? Because she's using that as like a protection against how she knows Shadow Weaver makes her feel.
Mm.
But also she does genuinely kind of fear her, right, too? Like, because she is getting abused by her. It'd be funny if she wasn't so terrible. It'd be funny to see her so mad if she wasn't going to take that out on me, right? I feel like that's kind of where Catra is coming from here.
Yeah.
And then, we get this like confrontation between Adora and Catra, right? Where Catra, Adora just straight up tells Catra, like, what we've been doing is wrong. The Horde has been manipulating us and lying to us this entire time. Hordak, Shadow Weaver, they've all been lying to us and they're evil, right? And Catra says, duh, you just figured that out, right? And so obviously Catra already knew that Shadow Weaver has been manipulating them. And again, she's distanced herself from that, right? Because that's her way of protecting herself. And And because of that distancing that she has done from that, that is what makes it easier for Catra to accept her role as being evil rather than Adora being able to accept that, right? Because Catra has already told herself that she doesn't care. We know deep down that that's a lie, right? But this is what she's telling herself to protect herself. And that's what makes it so much harder for Catra to change her ways. Yeah.
She literally even says it to Glimmer at the end. She says, "I don't care," and Glimmer's like, "No, I think you do though.
Yeah,
like you do. Like I see you skulking around here like a dumb asshole. I know you care."
Exactly.
Like all that "I don't care" stuff. It's all just hollow. It's hollow words.
Exactly. And like what you said earlier too, right? Like Catra's perfect picket fence future is just her and Adora like running the Horde together, right? Like that's what her like dream was here too, right? And we get that kind of reestablished here too, right? Where like again, it doesn't matter what the Horde is doing, the two of us look out for each other, right? Like this is what Catra has wanted, and like she sees Adora's leaving her not as, oh, Adora's doing the right thing, the Horde is evil and she's going to go be a good guy, but she sees it as, you know, she doesn't care about the same thing that I care about. She doesn't care about
abandoning me.
She's abandoning me and she's leaving me, right? Exactly. And she even has this like line here too, right? Where you know, Adora says something like, "I'm not going home, Catra. I can't, not after everything." And of course, we know that Adora is talking about like how she can't go back to being evil and hurting people. And she even like kind of invites Catra to like come with her, right? But Catra, again, like she can't change as easily as Adora can because she's distanced herself from this feeling of caring about what she's doing. So it's a lot harder for her to shift her ways. And she has this like line here too, right? Like, you know, you're going to throw everything away for them. What happened to you? You're going to leave me, right? She doesn't say you're going to leave the Horde. She says you're going to leave me.
She takes it very personally.
Exactly. And then she zaps Adora, right? She like attacks her physically, which I think is like, and she even had that line too, right? She's like, "Or do I need to zap you again?" Right? Like, she's like learned how to deal with people from Shadow Weaver, right? I feel like that's also important too, right? Like this manipulation and this physical abuse is all learned behavior, right? So again, it's one of those things where like I can't take people seriously when they say like the trauma doesn't justify the actions, because like this is all Catra knows. This is all that she's been taught. So like how could you expect her to act any differently, you know?
And it's a side of Shadow Weaver that Adora did not personally experience. Like Adora was still abused. Like Adora was abused emotionally and she was manipulated constantly. But she was not physically abused in the way that Catra has been.
Exactly. So again, like that behavior is learned, right? Catra is attacking Adora because that's how she has been dealt with. So yeah, that's really important. And then the last, or actually I have two more notes on this episode. So one more thing I want to talk about is the transformation sequence. So this is where the first episode where we get the transformation sequence of She-Ra, right? And I feel like this episode in particular is kind of giving us this idea, right? That She-Ra and Adora are kind of separate entities. This transformation sequence, I feel like kind of adds to the idea that like Adora has to transform into She-Ra, right? Like, this kind of the dynamic between Adora and She-Ra is getting kind of established here. So we're under this impression in the beginning, right, that She-Ra is kind of this separate entity that Adora has to like go through this sequence, right, to transform into. And then like Glimmer has a line later on too, right, where like someone asks like, "Oh, is that Adora?" And she says like, "That's She-Ra," right? So there's a little bit of this separation being established here, which I want to just put a pin in because that relationship between Adora and She-Ra is something that'll get developed and questioned later on, right?
Absolutely. And the nature of the transformation sequence changes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And how that changes, I think, is also thematically relevant to what that transformation represents, right? And then the last thing that I just want to talk about with this episode, just kind of reiterating the point that I brought up earlier of like Katra really just like, you know, physically feeling her emotions and how that dictates her actions going forward, right? Like this look that she gives Adora, right, when Adora decides to actually fight against and like, you know, destroy the tanks and everything, and we see this look of betrayal on Katra's face, right? And Adora tries to like call out to her, Katra, but the damage is done, and like, you know, Katra doesn't see Adora fighting and protecting innocent people. What she sees is Adora attacking her and attacking what they believed in their entire lives. And you know, Katra feels this feeling of betrayal, and that feeling is what she's trying to avoid, and how that is the central motivation for her moving forward, and how that dictates her actions moving forward. So again, this abandonment issue, this trauma does not justify Katra's actions moving forward, but it does explain them.
Explains them, yeah.
It does explain them. So I feel like that's going to be important for Katra moving forward.
It might just be. It might just be.
It might just be. And of course, at the end of the episode here, we get the first instance of Best Friend Squad, which is just cheesy and wholesome and adorable, and I love it.
Yeah, Best Friend Squad with room for one more later down the line.
Yeah, one more. Yeah, so that's all I got on episode 2. Episode 3, I have like 4 notes. How are you feeling though? How are you feeling? We've been going for almost 2 hours now. How's the chat feeling? How are you feeling, Tom?
I'm very tired.
You're very tired.
But I mean, we can keep going if you want. I'm very tired, but God, there's so much to talk about.
There's so much.
Maybe I naively thought, like, going into this, naively thought, oh, we talk about season 1 in a single stream.
Yeah, no, that's not happening. Knowing us, we just have so much to talk about. Maybe let's go through. Actually, let's go through episode 3 and episode 4 kind of quickly. I feel like episode 4 I have less to say, but episode 3 I have at least a few things I want to talk about. The first thing I wanted to say is, you know, so this kind of question is being established here at the beginning, right? So, you know, Glimmer wants to show She-Ra to her mom. We're getting kind of, again, just more development between Glimmer and her mom and what this relationship is like, right? And then Glimmer does eventually, like, want to show She-Ra to her mom, but she doesn't want to start with the Horde stuff. She wants to start with She-Ra, right? And so she asks Adora, can you transform into She-Ra? And that's how we'll introduce you to her mom, right? But then Adora at the beginning here has like trouble with her transformation, right? Like she's not able to just immediately turn She-Ra on in the way that she was in the first couple episodes, right? And so like I just want to kind of bring up this question here, right? Again, just kind of continuing along this thread of what does the transformation represent? What does this mean symbolically for Adora? And so I just want to kind of ask this question here at the beginning of this episode, right? Like, why isn't she able to transform into She-Ra at the beginning here, right? Like, what is it that's preventing her from being able to complete this transformation? And I feel like this question is going to be just important to think about as we continue to explore this relationship between Adora and She-Ra.
Do you have anything conclusive that you want to share on that front? Because I don't have any thoughts. I had never really thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's kind of like, again, playing off of like what caused her transformation in the first couple episodes, right? Like her kind of embracing her true nature of wanting to protect people, wanting to be a good guy, wanting to, you know, not abandon people in their need, right? Like these are all key aspects of like who Adora is at her core. And as we explore what She-Ra represents thematically for Adora, right? Like She-Ra, I think we can kind of say it represents Adora's true self, right? It represents kind of like her true being for like who she is, and obviously that has like a queer aspect to it as well, with the transformation and her actually like physically turning into a different body, and of course like how her relationship with Katra informs that that nature that she has, right? And so I feel
I think that's absurd. This show is the straightest show ever made, and everything you're saying is crazy.
Yeah,
Crazy talk. It's
sure,
woke.
sure. Right,
Woke
sure.
mob
Um,
strikes again.
so yeah, just like this idea of Shira like being Adora's authentic self, and the fact that she's having trouble with this transformation here, right? Because she's still struggling with who is her authentic self. What does her authentic self even really mean? And right now she's trying to turn into Shira as a form of almost manipulation, right? Like she's trying to hide her true self by turning into Shira. And so I feel like that's kind of why she's not able to do it in this beginning scene in this episode. So I just find that kind of interesting.
And it kind of it resolves by the end of the episode.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Sort of itself, that moment is itself a bit of a turning point.
Right, exactly. And it's again what I kind of said in the last episode too, right? It's Adora making that choice. It's her reaffirming that she is like going to do this of her own volition, right? Like she says, the princesses won't defend Etheria, then I will, right? So that's kind of two things with her character, right? One, taking on this inflated sense of responsibility like on her shoulder. That's something that'll get kind of explored with her character throughout the show.
Glimmer really, I mean, this episode also establishes Glimmer's unhealthy tendency, like Catra, to just shift way too much responsibility.
Yes, exactly.
Onto Adora in some ways that are often volatile and
yes,
really harmful.
Exactly. So that line kind of does two things. One, it kind of brings us closer to this idea of Adora's inflated sense of self-responsibility, and also it reaffirms the choice, right? The choice that she is making. This is not her destiny. This is not her forced path that someone is making her do. This is her choice because she's embracing her true nature, and that's what Shira represents, right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
I do also want to briefly just talk a little bit about Madame Raz. Madame Raz, again, is like one of those kind of tropey characters, right? Like we kind of, she's being kind of established here in like broad strokes, where she's like that wacky kind of a little bit like out of reality. And because of that, because she's a little bit crazy, she has this like air of mystery to her. But she's also this like guardian in a way because she has this knowledge and she's able to kind of like give this knowledge to Adora that that guides her throughout her journey, right? And that eventually does lead her to making that choice at the end of the episode of like being part of the rebellion. But I just want to say that Madame Raz is a really wonderful character that plays with these tropes of like crazy, mysterious elder, right?
She just wants to make a pie for her friend.
Yeah, it's really charming and it's really sweet, and I really like her.
The bit where she takes the pie to Mara.
Oh, my
heart! Long deceased Mara, just like
yeah, my heart. Yeah, I really like Madame Raz, and I think that she's just fun. I like her design.
I think there's an irony to the fact that Raz is the only character in the show who like constantly calls Adora by a name that is not hers, but is also like the only character in the show who I think sees Adora's authentic self.
Yeah, totally. And it's funny that you say that because I feel like that is kind of the crux of the show, right? Where like Adora is trying to find out who she is, and she has this idea that she thinks she knows who she is. Other people have this idea that they think that they know who she is. But Raz, with this like knowledge of who Shira is kind of able to see through all of that and know Adora for who she truly is. But because she's like already 10 steps ahead of everybody, she knows that Adora and Shira are like the same, one and the same, right? And so her calling Adora by the wrong name is almost like her being ahead of everybody else in knowing who Adora really is, and I think that that's kind of cool.
And then there's Horde Prime, who's just a dork-ass loser.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
It's a friggin' dork-ass loser.
Yeah. But yeah, I just really like Madame Raz. I feel like she's such an intriguing and such a cool use of this like wacky, mysterious elder guardian trope.
Voiced by Grey Griffin.
Is she really? That's awesome.
Yeah, I've mentioned it before. I said when we were watching when she was first introduced, I sent you two gifs of Azula and
Oh, that's
Raz, and I was
right.
like,
That's right. That's so funny, man. She's amazing. She's an amazing voice
"She's
actor.
great." Yeah. Yeah, Raz. I love Raz. Raz could so easily just be like kind of annoying.
Yeah.
Raz, I feel like is mostly inspired by Yoda.
Right.
Um,
Right. Totally.
when Yoda shows up, Master Yoda, and you have the whole thing of Yoda being like this annoying little shit, and it's all like a test.
Yeah.
Except Raz really is just a little loopy.
Yeah. Yeah.
She's like what you get if you mixed Yoda with Dr. Manhattan, because like Dr. Manhattan, she perceives all of time
Right.
kind of at once in like a
Yeah.
big pool rather than a linear fashion.
Yeah. Yeah. But she's
Um,
also just like a goofy little pie old lady.
she just wants to make a
Just
pie.
wants to make a pie. Yeah, I really, really like Raz. And I also kind of like how almost disconnected Raz is from like the greater narrative. Like she's just this like wacky old lady that wants to make a pie and was friends with Mara. But that's like really the extent of her involvement with like the entire larger narrative, right?
Well, she's you get the impression she's a person that really only She-Ra can connect with.
Right.
Like,
Right.
she lives in a place that you can't consciously actually find on purpose.
Right.
Like, normally you just find it by mistake, and it's like a non-existent liminal space
Right.
between.
Totally.
It's complicated. She's a very unusual character, and I do like that they never explain
Yeah.
what she is.
I like that too. I really like the mystery kind of around her because it's more compelling. I feel like to just not know than to get solid answers.
I agree. I don't want to know how or why Seahawk set those boats on fire, and I don't need
I
to.
don't need to know.
It's not important information.
Exactly, exactly. And the last note I just have about this episode is just this scene with Katra. I kind of already mentioned it already, but again, just Katra like physically feeling her pain, right? Like her seeing this little drawing of Adora and her and like scratching at it and then her screaming and crying as she like rips up and tears up her bed. Like I feel like this is just like an important aspect of her character that like her pain and her hurt manifest physically in her body and like it manifests in these like violent outbursts that she's like not able to control, right? So yeah, this is just an important aspect of her character that I like that they gave us this moment with her, right?
Yeah,
And then
lovely quote.
how she feels the need to kind of like immediately as soon as Shadow Weaver walks in, like she's got those walls up, right? She like wipes the tears out. She's standing straight again. She's angry, right? She manifests this hurt into her anger. And
It's like the only way she knows how to express her emotion is to get angry and lash out.
exactly, exactly. And then she has to completely shut everything down other than that anger when she's confronted with Shadow Weaver, right? So yeah, again, like I really love the writing in Katra. I feel like it's just so beautifully done.
I'm so excited to get into the later episodes where we can actually talk about Shadow Weaver in more detail. Because every time we bring up Shadow Weaver, I want to talk about Shadow Weaver, but we can't yet.
I know we can't get into it yet, but yeah, she's just so well written, and like even just like this fear that we see in Katra, right, with Shadow Weaver like touching her, like it's just so well done and so well established.
Twisted.
So twisted, so twisted. But like again, like it's so complicated too, though, right? Because like there's obviously a fear that's coming from Katra to Shadow Weaver, but there's also like a flippancy, right? She doesn't care what Shadow Weaver has to say to her because she knows that she'll never be good enough on some level, right? So there is like this confrontation within Katra as well, of wanting to be like, um, pushing back against Shadow Weaver. But that underlying fear is still always there because she knows that Shadow Weaver is also this like powerful figure that can control her, right? And of course, there's like the fear of like Hordak and all this other stuff that adds to it.
Yeah, and Hordak is himself. I mean, we haven't even talked about.
We haven't talked
Hordak.
about Hordak at all yet.
We could probably save Hordak for
We'll save
the
him,
next
yeah.
stream. But Hordak himself, I think, is very interesting because he plays into a larger overarching theme of intergenerational trauma.
Yeah.
Because really it all kind of like Hordak is functionally the abused child of the leader of a cult.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
And then Shadow Weaver is the abused child of the abused child of a leader of a cult.
Yeah.
And then Catra and Adora are the abused children of the abused child of the abused child of the leader of a cult.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like this like cycle of abuse that ends with Adora and Catra.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's again coming back into the kind of destroying the tropes of how it all plays out. Like bringing in Horde Prime as the big bad isn't just a way of getting rid of Hordak. Like it's used instead to fundamentally reframe how we understand him and who he is, and he's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even he has depth, and he's just like this big scary man.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Sorry, I've been ignoring the chat for a little bit, and I see May's comment here where they say I think Adora doesn't fully feel worthy yet, and maybe that's why she doesn't transform in the beginning. Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it too, right? Because again, like her motivations for transforming into She-Ra the first couple episodes has been to protect her friends, right? I mean, they weren't her friends yet, but she wanted to protect people. And so there's like just that aspect of like she doesn't know who she is yet. I think that is part of that as well. But that's basically all I had to say on this episode. The next episode is when we start getting into like the other princesses and stuff. I have a couple of notes just like on Perfuma. I don't know if we want to go ahead and start with that right now, or if we want to just maybe call it for the day and get into like Perfuma and the other princesses and stuff in the next stream. Does that sound like a good plan to you?
I feel like it's a good plan. I feel like it would be a bit weird to talk about one princess and then get into the others later. After that. We kind of gave like a good overview of them at the beginning.
Yeah. One thing I will say with this episode though is I feel like this episode is kind of the start to the theme of the show. The theme being, teamwork makes the dream work. The power of friendship is the most powerful force we have, right? Like I feel like this is the episode that really starts to hammer that theme home, and that'll obviously play a big part in the entire show, and Adora's character arc as well too, right?
The theme that Perfuma will fucking kill you, but she'll do it with a smile.
Exactly. Also, Perfuma is trans. I don't care what anyone says. She's so trans.
I mean, they all are.
They really all are, but Perfuma especially is just super trans.
I mean, the real gold standard on that front is Seahawk. Seahawk takes the
Seahawk is so trans mask. It's ridiculous.
Seahawk is like its own gender.
The Seahawk gender.
My pronouns are Seahawk.
His gender is pirate.
He's not even a pirate. He's like literally not even a pirate. He's just Seahawk.
He's just Seahawk. Oh my god. Yeah, I love Seahawk. I love all those side characters. They're so good. But yeah, we'll get into Perfuma and the rest of the princesses and stuff in the next stream, and we'll talk about Hordak in the next stream too, because we didn't even touch on Hordak yet. He's a very interesting character. On Hordak. Yeah. I mean, in season 1, he really is just kind of meant to just be this like looming scary figure, right? And like a threat to Catra and like Adora, and but there's so much more that we could get into that we'll save for the future.
Indeed.
But yeah, we'll go ahead and wrap it up for today. Thank you everyone who joined us and who participated in the chat. Really, really good points that were brought up. And I really, really love talking about this show. You know, this is, again, a different format than we usually do, but I had a really good time. She-Ra, I definitely can say that I slept on it for way too long. But now that I have watched it, it has quickly become one of my favorite animated shows that I've seen. Definitely one of my favorite shows that I've seen this year, I would say. It's just so good. And there's so much to get into. There's so much to chew on in this show. There's just like there's so much complexity and so much like richness in the characters, and like it's so interesting. It's so compelling, and I'm loving the show, and I am having a really great time talking about the show with all of y'all, and especially with season 1 when there's so much that so much of the foundation that's being built for what the show is going to become, right? So rewatching the show and talking about it with all of you and with you as well, Tom, is really giving me a new sense of appreciation for just how good it really is. And I'm really excited to continue on with the discussions moving forward. So what the plan is right now for future discussion streams, right now we are going to be doing streams on Saturdays. I'll try my best to be on time in the future. I apologize for, I wasn't feeling that well this morning, so I was moving a little bit slower. So thank you all for your patience in starting a bit late today. I really appreciate it. But for the streams moving forward, we are going to be doing them on Saturdays instead of Sundays. This is just to try out a little bit of a new schedule. And I feel like it might work a little bit better for more people. So we'll see how it goes. But that's the plan for now. So we'll be continuing on our discussion for season 1 as we continue to discuss the show next week on Saturday, December 10th. That'll be the next discussion stream. In the meantime, go check out Tom's channel. Tom over on the Curmudgeon Media channel recently dropped an Owl House video that we teased during our last Owl House discussion stream, but now the video is finally out, so definitely check it out. It's so good. And Tom's analysis as ever is brilliant, so definitely go check that out if you haven't already. What else is going on? I'm still playing some more Pokemon. I'm having fun with it. I might do some competitive battling stream in the future as well, which might be fun, so look out for that in the near future as well. What else? Oh, I'm taking some time off work later this month too, so maybe we might plan some extra fun streams if we're up for that in the future as well. But I think that's pretty much all I have. I obviously am really excited to talk about the show with y'all, and can't wait to get into the later seasons especially too.
Yep, it only goes up from here.
Yep, absolutely.
We haven't even got into like the friggin' crazy good stuff yet.
Yeah, for sure. And already season 1 is so good, and it only gets better. So I'm really excited to get into it. Is there anything else that you wanted to say before we wrap up, Tom?
Get paid, get laid, Gatorade.
As they say, as the famous saying goes.
I want to go get some tea, and I want to continue to shiny hunt for Tinkertuff.
Yes.
Tinkertink.
Hell yeah.
Which I still have not found. It doesn't exist. It's a fucking fable. It's my white whale.
Oh my gosh. Your white whale is the pink little Splob Pokemon.
The irony being that I actually found a shiny Sotodle very easily.
So you did
like
find that whale.
The actual white whale Pokemon, I found a shiny of that very easily. I didn't have to look that hard.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. But yeah, all right, let's go ahead and wrap it up then. Thank you all again so much for joining us. We'll see you next week for more She-Ra discussion, and stay safe and take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.